But at this point, we would like to invite our first panel to come up here, which is going to be chaired by Senator Matt Schmit, who is a co-author on this project. He's part of the team that did the research and set up a lot of the interviews and that we had with businesses and ended up playing a key role in doing this report. And for this panel, we're going to focus on some of these emerging clusters that we've identified that Jonathan pointed out. I'm going to turn it over to Matt. And get the first, do you want to handle that in PowerPoints? Okay. All right, let me get this out of here.
All right, well, thanks, Lee. It's been a pleasure working with you over the years and collaborating over projects related to industry clusters. I see a lot of value in this frame and using it for policy making. I also have really enjoyed teaming up with you on Thursday nights and having a class on this very topic as well, industry clusters. Again, a lot of use, I think a lot of good ideas. Obviously, the amount of content that we were bringing to the table today speaks to that. Well, I won't belabor the point here. We'll kick into this pretty quick here, but I'd just like to say that I think the cluster framework provides a great framework for talking about our strengths, how to invest in them and play off of them, those strengths as they currently exist. But as Jonathan alluded to previously, I think this framework also helps us identify emerging clusters and opportunities that we're able to maybe direct resources to and nurture and create an environment for that next wave of industry clusters to thrive in Minnesota. We have a great panel here with us today, and I really look forward to the exchange. As they're presenting, I think each has a PowerPoint. Think of some questions you'd like to ask. We will have time after they're presenting to have a little discussion around these various topics. With that said, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Mike Davin is executive editor of the Business of Robotics, a globally focused robotics trade publication based in the Twin Cities. He's on the advisory board for the Robotics Alley Conference and Expo, which happened to be held in St. Paul this year. And he serves on the executive committee of the Twin Cities chapter of the Association for Unmanned Vehicle Systems International. A journalist by trade, Davin has worked in a variety of newspaper and magazine roles. He holds a master's degree in journalism from the University of Missouri and a bachelor's degree from Boston College. Without further ado, Mike Davin.
Thank you very much. Is there a clicker I can use, or?
Yeah, we'll get this up here. If you'd like to present from here, come
absolutely.
on up. Here, Lee, why don't you come up? Okay.
Click on that down here.
Okay. Which one's your?
That's me, yeah.
Yep, there you go. All right, go get it.
Okay, thank you very much for that introduction. So as you just heard, I'm Mike Davin. I'm the editor of the Business of Robotics, which is a globally focused publication. We cover robotics throughout the world, but we're based right here in the Twin Cities, which gives me an interesting perspective on both what's happening around the world and right here. And so that's what I want to talk about. I want to take a look first, give you a sense of what's happening in robotics in general, and then kind of go into what's happening here in the Twin Cities and the region in what I think is rightly being talked about as an emerging cluster in this area. So, okay, as you just heard, my main role is as the editor of the Business of Robotics, which is a trade publication, but I'm also affiliated with the Association for Unmanned Vehicle Systems International Twin Cities chapter, which I'll talk about a little bit later, as well as the Robotics Alley Conference and Expo. So robotics is really exploding right now. It's sort of, there's so many exciting things happening, and I'm going to go through some of them, that we kind of talk about it as being sort of a robotics revolution that's happening. When I say robotics revolution, though, sometimes people's first response is, okay, so when are our robot overlords coming to take over, take our jobs, enslave us? They have sort of a negative perception of what robotics and robots are. A lot of times when I say that, robot revolution, the first thing that people picture is this. Okay, so this is a robot from the movie RoboCop. Obviously, that's a very negative view of what robots are. But from our perspective, for people who actually write about robots and work on robots, there's a lot more to robots than this. If this is the first thing you picture when you hear the word robot, we feel like that's the same as if I said, picture a dog, and the first thing you pictured was this, Cujo from Stephen King. Or if I said, picture a doll, and the first thing you pictured was this, Chucky. Obviously, there's a lot more to dolls than that. Or if I said, okay, picture in your mind a sandwich, and this is what you pictured, a scary monster sandwich. So there's no such thing as that robot that I showed first. That's a Hollywood creation. But there are a lot of very useful, helpful robots that are out there. I'm going to go through some real ones. This is actually a very exciting thing. This is the third generation of the Lego Mindstorms robotics kit. So this is for hobbyists and young students to learn how to build robots, how to program robots. It just came out. It's a big deal because it's helping young people learn programming. And as we've talked about, one of the strengths that we have in this area is our education system, our workforce. This is sort of helping create the next generation of them. One statistic that gets talked a lot about in my area, and you may have heard it quoted since it came out last year, but here in Minnesota, in the state of hockey, we actually have more high school robotics teams than we have high school hockey teams at this point. So that's a very good sign for what we're doing here in the state. Another robot, is anybody familiar with this robot that came out last year, Baxter? This is a really big deal, a really sort of revolutionary thing. This is a robot that can be used in sort of manufacturing sense on an assembly line or something like this. But what's amazing about it is that, well, two things, but one thing is that it only costs $22,000. So when you think of a traditional industrial robot, these things are hundreds of thousands of dollars, well out of the reach of a typical small or medium-sized business. $22,000, almost anybody can afford to use this. The other thing that's amazing about it is that it's safe sorry about that. Okay. It's safe for people to work right next to it. Okay, so your traditional industrial robots, they're in cages because it's unsafe for humans to be anywhere near them. They're working very quickly. This works a little more slowly, but it has sensors on it that allow for it to be working actually cooperatively with people or in very close proximity to people. This is from a company called Rethink Robotics out of Massachusetts, but I learned last week, interestingly, that part of the sort of steel structure on the inside of it is manufactured right here in St. Paul. So I thought that was very interesting. Just go through a couple more. This is a robot over at Georgia Tech used for research. This is a little sort of toy robot, but that illustrates a trend that's happening right now. The brains of that robot are actually powered by an iPhone, and that's sort of a trend in robotics. The fact that we're creating so many of these consumer devices that are very, very powerful actually allows for more inexpensive robots to be created because they don't have to build in these sort of expensive chips inside of it because we all carry one around in our pockets already. So a lot of companies are using that for things like this can be used for telepresence, which is sort of beaming your face into a space where you're not currently. Other people are doing that with iPads and things like that. On a very inexpensive scale. The other thing that the creation of these phones and things does is it makes the cost of the small cameras that are used in them, the sensors, all that sort of stuff go down because Apple and other companies are manufacturing them on such a large scale, which makes it affordable for startups and things like that to utilize them in their own products. So very exciting. This is another new product that's a sort of a toy, but it's almost as smart as the Google self-driving car. It's, again, powered by an iPhone. It was just released a couple weeks ago. But basically, it's not your typical stock car that you had when you were a kid. This is an intelligent, self-driving vehicle that they're selling to kids for $200, which is incredible given the technology that's in it. This is the Google car. Okay, we consider this to be part of robotics too. This thing, you've probably heard a lot about this, but this thing actually works. It'll actually drive you around. They've driven hundreds of thousands of hours out in California without an accident, and so this is coming. Here's the Curiosity rover on Mars. This is a telepresence robot. That's just to give you a sense of what's happening globally. Some things to note. These are recent statistics. Okay, so between 2014 and 2016, world robot sales will increase by 6% on average per year. Most of this is in what we consider industrial robots, so the type of things that are putting together automobiles and electronics and things like that. But domestic robots, which you can see as the next statistic, which represent a smaller chunk of the market currently, are also growing very quickly. You can see they're growing 15%. And that's again a smaller market because when you think of domestic robot, right now there's Roomba, which is the vacuum that you have in your house, but actually having robots that live and work within the homes is very complicated. So we're not quite there yet, but we're getting close. And I should mention on that first statistic, you can see that overall these were growing about 6% per year, but in China that number is more like 25% per year. They're really quickly ramping up their use of robots. I think Japan is still the number one in terms of use of robots and the number of people to robots ratio. And then the other countries that are in the lead are the United States and Germany and some of the ones you'd expect. But China's growing very quickly, and so we want to keep up with that. Okay, so UAVs, which that's unmanned aircraft vehicle, or more commonly known as drones. We consider that part of robotics. That's something that's coming down the pike very quickly and will generate a lot of jobs. And then for the purposes of this forum, we've sort of taken 3D printing and considered a separate category, but we sort of think of 3D printing as being part of robotics. One, because 3D printers essentially are robots, and two, because they're so integral to creating the prototypes and some of the things that we need to sort of build new robots and for new startups to get going in the robotics industry. So other recent headlines. Okay, so the FAA released a roadmap for UAS just a week or two ago. The reason for that is that they've been congressionally mandated to integrate UAS or drones into the national airspace by 2015, which is coming very quickly. Now, by 2015, what they'll be integrating are very small things in probably sort of remote areas for ecological studies and agricultural things and things like that. So they won't probably be flying around downtown Minneapolis at that point. But that's coming very quickly, and that's going to be a huge industry and one that we want to integrate. We want to take advantage of here in our region. Currently, the only UAS that's been approved by the FAA has been approved for use in the Arctic Circle. So obviously, they're not taking any chances. There's very little safety concerns or privacy concerns in that area. Okay, so just last week, a robot arm rung the NASDAQ bell because a new ETF, exchange-traded fund, was launched, which tracks robotics stocks. Georgia Tech just added a new institute for robotics. U of M is, as we'll talk about later, is vital to our cluster here in this area. National Robotics Initiative, which is an initiative that the Obama administration launched in 2011, gave out some more funding recently, and that's a good thing. People within the industry would say it needs to be more, but even at a federal level, there's been recognition that robotics is something that needs to be seeded and is going to be an important part of the future of employment in this country. Novel robotic solutions make solar power more efficient, so we're seeing robotics go into all sorts of different industries. And then there's recently a study that says North America to ship 10 million robotic vehicles by 2032. Almost every major car manufacturer has announced that by 2020 they expect to have a fully autonomous self-driving vehicle. Now, the holdup in that case is probably going to be less about the technology and more about the regulation in terms of there's a lot of issues to work through on that case, because if a robotic self-driving car crashes into you, who's liable, that sort of thing. A lot of issues to work through there, but I think once they're actually on the road, they'll save a lot of lives, and the technology is getting very close. So areas in the robotics revolution, and you'll see that so many of these overlap with the bubbles we've seen on the cluster map of what's happening here. Medicine, agriculture, security and defense, industrial applications, and personal service. These are the areas where robotics is really going to be coming most quickly and being commercialized to the forefront. And again, these are areas that our region has some competitive advantages and strengths in, and so we want to sort of nurture robotics. Okay, so let's talk about what our cluster consists of currently, who are some of the big players. So we've got Stratasys, which of course is one of the world leaders in 3D printing, based right here in Eden Prairie. They recently acquired a startup out of Brooklyn called MakerBot, which makes sort of desktop-sized 3D printers, so inexpensive, ones that you can actually afford for your home. So anybody in their garage can be creating all kinds of things out of all kinds of different materials. Of course, as I mentioned, a lot of innovation in robotics is still driven out of the universities, and we're fortunate here to have a very strong leader in that area in the University of Minnesota. Right below that, you can see Recon Robotics, which builds throwable robot cameras, which are used by law enforcement and military. You can throw it into, if you're in Afghanistan and there's a compound you're not too familiar with what's inside, you throw the robot in there, you can drive it around, it will show you what's in there. That technology originally spun out about 6 years ago of a project at the U of M. So you can see the direct relationship between what's happening at the university level to then creating a company that 6 years later is selling thousands of systems to the U.S. military, to law enforcement, and to other organizations worldwide. So Polaris, which was mentioned earlier as one of the big corporate headquarters that we have here, has a defense unit which is heavily involved in robotics. So we talked a little bit about the Google self-driving car. Polaris, as you can imagine, is also interested in unmanned and self-driving vehicles, or at least utilizing some of that technology and some of their platforms, particularly in their defense area. So they're a big supporter of robotics. PAR Systems, before I got involved with robotics, I didn't even know PAR Systems was here, but they're out in Shoreview, and they are building, for example, some of the systems that are being used to clean up Fukushima and Chernobyl. If you ever get a chance to tour their facility out in Shoreview, it's really impressive. Huge warehouses with industrial robots twice as tall as the ceiling in this room, that then they're shipping across the world because we have the expertise and build the finest systems of those type in the world right here in Minnesota. And I think a lot of people in the area don't even know that company exists. NPC Robotics, they started out building power wheelchairs. I think it used to stand for National Power Chair, but now they build sort of mobile platforms that they sell to, primarily to the military, I think, but also to other companies. Northland Community and Technical College is on here because they have one of the best UAV training programs in the world and in the country, to teach people how to service these things. This is going to be a huge industry, and to have people who are trained in reading the imagery that those collect and in servicing them is a very good thing, and I'm glad we've already got sort of a foothold on that. And then, companies like 3M and Medtronic, they're not pure play robotics companies, obviously, but you'd be crazy to think that they're not highly interested in that space and working on things right now. So what's happening in Minnesota around the cluster? Several years ago, a conference and expo called Robotics Alley was started. One of the primary goals of that was just to help raise awareness of robotics and the various companies and the sort of cluster, the emerging cluster and the ingredients of the cluster that we have located here in the Twin Cities. I think it's been largely successful in that. The most recent event was held last week in St. Paul. We had Michael Langley from Greater MSP was there and spoke. We had representatives from the Department of Employment and Economic Development there. They're well aware of what's happening in robotics and doing a lot to help promote that in this area. So we had a lot of speakers from some of the top robotics companies in the world come to the Twin Cities to see what we're doing and to talk about what they're doing in their region. Again, it's good that we have things like this because a few years ago when this was started, some of the companies that I mentioned on the previous slide weren't even aware of each other's existence. And now I think we really created some of that awareness. AUVSI, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but it stands for the Association for Unmanned Vehicle Systems International, international organization, huge, the largest trade organization for unmanned vehicles and robotics in the world. And just this year, we started a Twin Cities chapter of that, and have started having networking events just to sort of, again, raise that awareness, bring people who are involved in this together in terms of becoming aware of each other and collaborating. And we had the president of AUVSI out here last week at the event, Michael Toscano, and hosted him, and he was very pleased with what's happening in the Twin Cities and with what's happening with AUVSI Twin Cities chapter. So we'll hopefully continue to grow that. Going forward, let's see, I had some notes on what I wanted to sort of mention as I wrapped up, but yeah, so what can we do? I think we have to think about being progressive in terms of our thought process with regard to new technologies like UAVs. What I started with was that image of the negative connotation of what a robot is. Obviously, there's a significantly negative connotation with the word drone and with what those can be. And obviously, their primary use to now has been military. But that doesn't mean there aren't a lot of very legitimate uses commercially here. There are concerns about privacy and things like that, but I think a lot of those issues can be worked through, and we have a lot of privacy laws on the books already that these would be subject to. So I think we need to be thoughtful about our approach to how we look at these new technologies, because if we are not a friendly environment for them, they will go elsewhere, and I can guarantee you this is going to be a very, very big business very soon. We have an advantage of like the University of North Dakota has a great program in terms of UAV, a great area for it. So regionally, I think we have a strength in that area. We want to nurture that. The same goes with regulations towards driverless vehicles and things as those come online. We just want to be thoughtful in our approach to how we look at those, even though they're new. Minnesota is, the other thing that robots get sort of a bad rap for is taking away jobs. Obviously, robots do take the place of some jobs, but largely they're sort of jobs that are not necessarily good jobs. And I recently had the opportunity to do an article and have a conversation with a company called Seagrid, which makes automated vehicles for warehouses. So they sort of take the place of like a forklift operator. And they were talking about some of the companies that they've worked with. Because of the added efficiency of having an automated system that could do that job, those companies were saving enough money that in some cases they were able to grow their staff, even though that they had to, lost some forklift operator jobs, 15% or so. And the new jobs that they were creating were the types of jobs that are more high-paying, high-skill. Deed, I think, has some better statistics on this than I would, but the types of jobs that robotics creates and would be creating in this area are, high-tech research and development type jobs, and jobs in those types of industries tend to have a multiplier effect. If you look at a company like Recon Robotics, which I'm very familiar with, because they provided the seed funding for the Business of Robotics publication, their robot is 1.2 pounds. It's very small. But the technology that's contained within that small package comes from about maybe 20 different vendors, many of which are in 20 to 30 different vendors, many of which are located here in Minnesota. Like we were talking about in terms of the support services and things we have in this area, there's a ton of great patent lawyers, intellectual property lawyers, things like that. These are all services that these companies need to utilize. And so I was trying to go quickly. I hope, if you have questions, please ask. But so that's sort of an overview of what's happening with robotics. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot, Mike. Your early pictures got our attention, and your content captured our imagination. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of questions for you shortly. In the interest of time, I'll introduce our next speaker from the microphone here. Steve Riedel joined the Minnesota Trade Office in July of 2001. And is the International Trade Representative for Environmental and Energy Industries. Companies Steve serves include wastewater treatment, pollution control, and waste management technology firms, as well as recycling, renewable energy, smart grid, and green product firms. Steve is also responsible for the markets in Southeast Asia, Korea, and Australia. For its part, the Minnesota Trade Office, or MTO, promotes international trade and provides information, training, and counseling to Minnesota businesses wishing to enter the international marketplace. International trade representatives evaluate company export readiness, provide market intelligence, determine export requirements, arrange trade missions, and participation in trade shows. Provide business contacts, and host foreign delegations. They stay quite busy, it sounds. Prior to all his good work at MTO, Steve received a master's degree in international business in 1986 from Schiller International University in London, and earned a bachelor's degree in psychology from Carthage College in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Steve, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction, State Senator Schmit, and thank you, Lee, for the invitation to participate in this great forum today. So State Senator Schmit told you a little bit about the trade office, so I may be able to skip a slide or two. Let's see, to advance, do I just hit this button here? Nope, oops, sorry. The arrow right here? How's that? There we go. All right. So most of you, I think, are familiar with the Department of Employment and Economic Development. I'm part of the trade office, which is a unit of DEED. My interest in the water technology sector began when I started to focus on water businesses in our state. My role is to help environmental sector companies at the trade office, and in 2009 I started a recurring event called the Water Technology Export Roundtable, and since then we've hosted about 15 of those events, and over the course of those 15 events I've gotten to know a lot of companies, and I've seen a lot of potential in that cluster, then met Lee to talk about taking a look at the cluster with a little bit more attention to statistical analysis and so forth, and I'm pleased here today to be part of looking at the water cluster as one of our emerging clusters. So one of the things I'm working on right now that I'm really excited about is a sort of a supersized water export roundtable that we're calling a Water Business Summit that will be hosted in 2014. And I'm starting to work with other organizations on that event. In fact, my colleague David Griggs from Greater MSP is here today. And I just met with him yesterday to talk about ways our two organizations can make that happen. So by mentioning this here, I'm sort of fast forwarding to the end of my presentation to answer the question, well, what can we do to support this cluster? One of them is to create events that allow the sector to help itself. So another question we're asking is there room for a trade association for the sector? I think there's enough synergy and energy in this cluster already that I think there's room for that. That's a question that we're asking. And the reason I put here See Wisconsin's Water Council is that our neighbors to the east of us already have one. And I look at this organization with a certain amount of envy and ask the question, how did the land of 10,000 lakes not get there first? So they are doing a really nice job of providing some political and government support to their cluster. And it's an interesting organization to look at as a model for something that we might be able to do here as well. So in sum, for now, there's a lot of reasons to expect growth for this sector. It's a little bit beyond emerging in my view. When I took a look at some of the stats that my colleagues helped me gather on how many people we already employ in the sector and what's already happening in the sector and how many big companies we already have in the sector, you know, it's coming along great. It's not just emerging. So let me tell you, I'll just name a couple of some of our largest companies. A lot of these company names have shown up in other sectors. So when it comes to linkages, you know, it's fascinating to see how some of our biggest companies are active in a number of sectors, obviously. So, you know, 3M's shown up a couple of times. Pentair, you know, they might be the most important. They've been active in countries like India for decades and have helped India build water desal plants. Ecolab acquired Nalco last year and just about doubled in size. It's important to mention GE and their GE Water and Process Technologies, because their presence here is a function of the fact that they acquired Osmonics, which is a very important part of our state's legacy as a innovator in the filtration and membranes field. It's huge. If you talk to anyone in this sector, they look to Osmonics as a real innovator at the beginning of this particular field. Dow acquired FilmTech, a Minnesota company, a few years back. An amazing fact about this company is that they manufactured the reverse osmosis filters that are used in the world's largest water desalination plant in Ashkelon, Israel. Coming from Minnesota, we're pretty far from the oceans. It's impressive that we pulled that off. 3M, what do they do in water? Among other things, they make sensors that go underground in order to help us monitor our groundwater resources, a question that's getting ever more important as water ground resources are being overexploited in parts of the world. But there's, so to tell you a little bit about what is water technology, because it's not an easy question to answer, it's not easy to get your arms around it. This is a kind of a diagram that shows how many layers go into a reverse osmosis filter. Reverse osmosis is at the end of the spectrum of all the different ways that you can filter water. Aeration is a crucial way to treat water as well. It's a way of treating wastewater by injecting oxygen into the water. This is basically a floating device with a prop on the end. It takes oxygen out of the air and pumps it into the water, and it basically helps feed the friendly bacteria in the wastewater such that it will consume the contaminants. And it's basically the way nature already does it, but we're accelerating it by putting oxygen into the water. And then that valve in the corner is made by a company in Sartell, Minnesota, near St. Cloud. Zurich is one of the world leaders in this category. They make the valves that allow you to turn on and off all the pipe networks that deliver wastewater to wastewater treatment plants and clean water to your home. They make them in all sizes. They make valves that are large enough that most of us in this room could step inside of it, if you can believe that. So all sizes of valves, and they're a world leader. It's a great story. So how about small and medium-sized companies? The surface aeration device that you saw, that's made by Aeration Industries in Chaska, Minnesota. Small, maybe medium-sized company at the most that flies under the radar, but they sell those devices in over 90 countries. You know, they're one of our superstars when it comes to export achievement. Lemna International, they use a natural form of wastewater treatment called duckweed. Duckweed is a type of plant that works in marshes and wetlands that naturally takes care of wastewater problems. Bar Engineering in Edina does all kinds of work dealing with phosphorus. They're largely an engineering company, but they have a lot of know-how, and we really have to include know-how as part of this question too. It isn't just devices and filters, it's really understanding how water problems need to be solved. Zurich, we just mentioned. Flatwater Fleet, another company under the radar, up in Duluth, Minnesota. This company makes a truck-mounted technology that takes care of wells, water wells that have exhausted their lifespan and would otherwise be rendered useless, and you might have to drill another well. They figured out a proprietary way of taking an existing well, making it work again, and when it's mounted on the back of a truck, you can drive around to all kinds of wells. Well, this little company up in Duluth has sold this truck-mounted system in over 50 countries, and they're now moving smartly into China. So we're really proud that that's a Minnesota company. Even our individual consultants are doing well because of their know-how. Peter Cartwright is one of the wise men of the membrane field. He's a frequent speaker at conferences in India, and he does well advising companies all over the world on membrane expertise. So again, you know, expertise, not just products. So a couple of emerging companies. These are some fun companies that have presented at my events, and when I heard what they're up to, I was really impressed with the innovation that they showed with the devices that they essentially invented and are bringing to the marketplace and are now growing internationally. Up in St. Joseph, Minnesota, a small company called Pristine Environmental learned that at construction sites, companies are struggling with what to do with something known as concrete slurry. That's the water that gets mixed up with wet concrete, and you can't just pour it on the ground. And it's very expensive to put back in a truck and drive off somewhere for treatment. So he invented this portable device. You put the dirty water in one end, the concrete slurry is collected into slabs, which you can just throw away, and then reusable water comes back out the other end. This guy is so busy making these things that the last time I called him, he didn't have time to talk to me. So, but he invented this thing, and he's doing really well, and he's going to do well overseas. He can't make them fast enough. Another fun one, a company called Creative Water Solutions. They figured out that a special variety of moss, sphagnum moss, has got great properties when it comes to water treatment. This moss removes some of the heavy metals out of water in the same way that chemicals can, but if you can do it naturally with a sustainable product like moss, why not use that instead of chemicals? So this company is having to overcome questions about how in the heck does moss clean water? That's one of their challenges, but it's working well, and it's working well enough that it's now being used in St. Paul's public pools, and if you visit one of these pools, I'm told that you do not smell chlorine there. And so it's working really well, and they are moving smartly overseas as well. Finally, tiny little company. It's actually two companies, Utility Management Solutions as well as Meter Logics. This company uses something called a sub-meter. Most of us, when we get our water bills, we're told how much water we use for our specific dwelling at the end of the month. But if you want to charge someone who rents an apartment to their water bill, you need to be able to tell them how much water they used. So this guy invented a sub-meter, which you can put on any pipe, and it'll tell you not just how much the dwelling used, but how much your washing machine used, how much your dishwasher used. You can put it on anything. And simply by telling people how much water they're using and asking them to pay for the water, it drove down water use significantly. So you think about how we, in a water-scarce world, we're trying to figure out ways to use less. This works really well. 18 to 39% reduction, according to a study. It's got great implications all over the world. We're all trying to figure out how to use and waste less water. So the next couple of slides will give you a little bit more detail that will help characterize what the job and labor scene is like for the industry, what kind of where Minnesota stands with respect to other states, and I want to acknowledge my smart colleagues at the Department of Employment and Economic Development who can gather and analyze and create this kind of information. Weston, thank you. Weston Merrick from DEED helped me put together the next couple of slides. I wanted to acknowledge him. He also helped me understand that it's just not always that easy to analyze this sector because water bridges so many parts of the economy that it's not just one set of NAICS codes that defines what water technology is. And there's differences from one definition to the next, and one thing that we ran into is some definitions include hydroelectric power. So I myself don't quite understand why that fits into water technology, but if it's in some definitions, you have to account for it. So it's not always easy. But generally speaking, water and wastewater treatment with some interesting things going on the side. So in terms of employment growth within the water sector, here's a couple of subsectors or industry niches within water that have grown particularly fast over the past couple of years. Number one is metal tanks, and this one caught me off guard a little bit because companies that make metal water tanks haven't been coming to my events and they haven't been asking the trade office for assistance, so I can't tell you who's making those, but it's an insight that that this kind of statistical analysis helps us uncover niches that are doing well that we would not have otherwise known about, because the rest of these are a little more familiar. Valves, pipes, pumping equipment, we're all familiar with that. So there's 900 establishments, companies, etc., across our state that fit within these codes, and machinery is near the top. But a total of about 16,000 workers. So, it employs a fair number of people, and we really think it's going to only employ more. Whoops, sorry. So, and here's an example how the definitions can make it a little hard to explain things. So here I'm showing you a chart that shows between 2008 and 2012, employment in the water sector actually declined a little bit. Well, we need to explain that that's due largely to some declines in the hydroelectric power generation sector. So, if we take that out, I think that trend would probably go up. It's just not that easy to actually take it out. So the point is, we still see plenty of opportunity for growth. So ignore this slide. So how do we measure up to the other states? We're number 10. You can see in the bar chart here that we're in red, 729 million worth of goods sold. So we're 10 out of 50 states. That's not bad. We're doing 10 out of 50. Texas is blowing everybody else out of the water. We had to take a look at that. We found that they make a lot of pumps, they make a lot of faucets, they make a lot of valves. So we have a ways to catch up to Texas, but we're doing well. And I'm also impressed that we're a little bit ahead of Wisconsin, which has got that water council. So then a couple of our neighbors are 16th and 26th right next door. But, you know, there's quite a level area there. I think we could move into 4th without a whole lot of effort. So competitiveness. The question that Lee asked us to think about with our emerging clusters is, are we competitive in the region, and if so, why? So this is largely based on my own observations and anecdotes, but here's reasons why I think we're competitive. We're already number 10 nationally. We're positioned to keep going. We have some great companies in our region already. Ecolab, GE, and Pentair help us rank number 1 in the field of water reuse. And there's some analysis out there that says water reuse is going to double over the next 5 years. So that spells opportunity for companies in that field. Water reuse is when on-site water is captured and at least partially cleaned so that it can be used again on-site. And it's a huge trend because city water supplies are under a great deal of pressure to encourage all their users to use less and to reuse that water. So water reuse is really big in this field. We're the land of 10,000 lakes. We have a great reputation for taking good care of our water bodies. We have the source of the Mississippi River. So we've had a lot of chance to practice, and that spells opportunity for us right there. We have the legacy of osmotics. We're really, really good at filtration and membranes. We're really good at pumping. And something that just came up recently, a connection that I really like, is the fact that reverse osmosis calls for very high pressure. In order to push water through a reverse osmosis membrane, you need to use lots of pumping energy. So that, in turn, generated demand to have very efficient pumps. And I was going to ask Lee a question. Is that a demand factor if part of the local demand? So now we have great pumping companies too, and that's a bonus to the fact that we have innovation in reverse osmosis here, and we've got great aeration firms. Global water issues that have been alluded to are only going to help. Water scarcity is happening all over the world. We don't have that problem yet, but what's great is we're helping other countries solve their water scarcity issues. Rainwater harvesting, didn't even mention that one today. A lot of these are demand drivers. And as has been mentioned several times this morning, we got a great workforce. We got lots of engineers, we got a great university, and all that adds up to, if companies are going to come and invest in Minnesota, and we hope they do, they've got really good workers here. So it's worth repeating, we've got a lot of reasons to expect growth for this sector, so I'm really excited about this sector. So that's the end of my presentation, but the big question for me is, now that we have all this great information about all the emerging clusters with robotics, with water, and with bioenergy, to me the bigger question is, how are we going to help them grow? What things can we concretely do to help support and grow these clusters? Thank you very much.
Well, thanks a lot, Steve. I think it's safe to say you whet our appetite for more discussion on water technology. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Brendan Jordan is a program director at the Great Plains Institute, where he leads policy, research, and technology commercialization initiatives to enable the transition to low-carbon energy system. He specializes in transportation, fuels, energy infrastructure, and bio-based industries. Brendan is the lead staff and organizer for the Bioeconomy Coalition of Minnesota, a multi-stakeholder initiative working to expand Minnesota's innovative bio-based chemical and advanced biofuel industry cluster. The coalition's mission is to improve Minnesota's state policy and regulatory agenda to expand bio-based chemical, advanced biofuel, and biomass thermal energy industries along the entire value chain, from R&D through commercial production and use. Members include leading technology companies, agriculture and forestry groups, and environmental groups. Brendan is a graduate of the Humphrey School with a degree of Science and Technology Policy.
That's it, yeah.
And we're loading his slides.
Bottom one. Well, I'll get started while those are being loaded up. I really thank Lee Munich and Steve Kelly and Senator Schmit for allowing me to be here. I think I'm really glad to see emerging clusters featured, because I think it's important, obviously, to focus on our existing clusters like medical devices, but in terms of where active engagement is going to be the most helpful. It's with our emerging clusters. And let's remember that at one point in our history, we didn't have a medical device cluster. We had some startup companies that got helped along to get to the point where we have this world-class cluster. And I think, if you look at robotics and water, and in our case, biorenewables, we're at that earlier stage where it's going to be make or break for the state. It could go either way. We could lose the cluster, or it could grow into something as big or bigger than some of our existing established clusters. So I'm talking about bio-based chemicals, renewable chemicals, and advanced biofuels today. Renewable chemicals. Okay, let's think about an oil refinery. They produce a whole variety of products. Only about 3 to 5% of the output of a barrel of oil becomes chemicals, plastics, and materials. But that represents about 40% of the revenue into a refinery. So it's important as we use our renewable resources that we have the same mindset of an oil refinery. Yes, we need to produce fuels and energy, but let's not miss the opportunity for the truly high-value products. So renewable chemicals are anything you would make out of oil that we can make out of bio-based materials instead. And that's, again, it's everything: plastics, chemicals, probably a good percentage of my wardrobe here, my pen, probably a lot of the building materials in this room, the chairs you're sitting on. We could displace a lot of that from bio-based materials, and most of it now is petroleum-based. On the biofuel side, Minnesota has been a real leader in developing an ethanol industry. Largely, it's a grain-based ethanol industry. We also have a biodiesel industry using oil to make biodiesel. And I think many of you are aware of the potential to move to the next generation of biofuels, not using grain, but using biomass, using corn stalks instead of corn grain, using wood residues. This is just a lot of that is driven by federal policy, the Renewable Fuel Standard, which mandates blending of biofuels. And there is a growing mandate for the advanced and cellulosic category, which does offer deeper greenhouse gas emissions reductions, and I think is a really key to growth and innovation in our existing sector. So that's the other part of the equation. We have a really exciting cluster in the state in both the chemicals and fuels area. Why is it here? There's been a lot of talk about linkages. Well, we had a bunch of great ideas and people spin out of Cargill. Starting with NatureWorks, which started out as a joint venture with Cargill and Dow to produce a renewable plastic that is biodegradable, that is now being produced at commercial scale. It's an established industry. You probably in the last week have picked up some food packaging that includes polylactic acid plastic. But out of Cargill, you had spin-off companies and people leave Cargill and start new companies. So companies like BioAmber, Sigetis, Relucio. You also have the fact that the U of M is here, the Center for Sustainable Polymers and Biosystems Engineering. You've had all sorts of, you have kind of a talent pipeline going into these companies. We have the resource as well as the companies. And by the way, just going back here, a lot of these, other than NatureWorks, a lot of these are startup companies. So we have R&D facilities and headquarters largely in the Twin Cities metro area. We've had a lot of venture capital investment. Over $300 million in the last 5 years has gone into this area. What we're not, other than NatureWorks, we're not doing a good job yet at getting the manufacturing in the state, which is really important, and I'm going to get back to that. We have the resource. This is biomass resources, and it also shows sort of existing industries. So in northeastern Minnesota, we have a great forestry resource. We also have a declining timber harvest. It's gone down about 50% in the last few years. We've lost a lot of OSB mills, and so there's a real crisis in northeastern Minnesota trying to figure out how do we keep loggers in the woods, frankly, because the timber harvest has declined so steeply, both to the housing recession, but also just structural changes in the market. People are not buying as much paper, and the industry is moving around worldwide. We also have a large agricultural biomass resource, and we have a whole bunch of ethanol plants that could be the basis for building the next-gen industries on top of that existing infrastructure. Again, no question, Minnesota has the biggest cluster of renewable chemical companies in the country, probably in the world if you're looking at headquarters and R&D. But we're not, again, we don't have the manufacturing. We have the headquarters and R&D. And that's a great thing to have, but we need both. A couple companies, just to give you some examples. Siggetis, based in Golden Valley. A lot of these companies are in the West Metro. They make something called levulinic ketals, which I don't expect you to remember what that is, but think of it as a building block technology. You can take this compound that they make and they've identified 12 different product categories. It includes things like phthalates. Phthalates are something that you mix with harder plastics to make them flexible. So any kind of flexible plastic has phthalates in it. You've probably also heard of phthalates because they're a endocrine disruptor and they're a high priority for phasing out. Well, if we want to phase out something, you have to have an alternative. Siggetis makes an alternative that performs better and does not have the toxicity implications of the existing incumbent technology. That's great. They're right now, and if you buy Method laundry detergent, it comes in a much smaller container because of an additive they add. They can get a lot of the water out of it. That product is about 95% bio-derived overall, and that small formulation, which saves water, saves transportation costs, would not be possible without a Siggetis additive. This is a company that's looking at figuring out how to scale up, and I think it would be fantastic if they would do that in Minnesota, but it's a global marketplace. So Minnesota needs to figure out how to help companies like that scale up here. Here's another thing that we were looking at, ethanol plants and how can we use that base to build on. Poet DSM, this is a company, they have a bunch of ethanol plants in Minnesota. This is actually a project in Iowa, but they are building right now, it's about 80% complete, one of the first cellulosic ethanol plants, not the first. There's about 3 operating right now, and they've all opened up within the last 6 months. But they're going to bolt on a cellulosic ethanol plant onto an existing corn ethanol plant. So they have their corn grain plant, turns corn grain into ethanol. They're going to bolt on a plant that turns corn stalks into ethanol. It'll be co-located, probably buying the materials from the same producers. They'll use their existing fuel marketing agreement, but their overall product will be much cleaner, greener, lower carbon intensity. They can share resources, share fermentation. They can produce power at the cellulosic plant to ship over to the grain ethanol plant to make the whole process more efficient. It's an exciting project. That's happening right now. They're going to be operating early next year. And we should be thinking as a state, how do we get some of these projects in Minnesota once they're operating elsewhere? This is just part of the story. This is advanced biofuels, and I've got a chart like this for Mississippi and Louisiana. These are states that are doing a better job than we are at attracting next-gen biofuel facilities. And it is, frankly, all new technology has required significant government investment. Whether you're talking about Apple Computer getting its first initial funding from an SBIR grant, whether you're talking about Google, whose search algorithm was developed by the National Science Foundation. You can look at everything, aviation, advanced materials, nuclear power, the internet, it all came from government investment. Guess what? This is new technology. It requires some support to get these first generation plants up and running. Iowa is in the lead. They have a whole bunch of cellulosic ethanol projects under construction, and it is because of a grant program called the Iowa Power Fund. Other states have done it in different ways. The industry in Minnesota, one thing that's really exciting is the industry has gotten together to figure out how to articulate an agenda and implement it. I was part of forming the Bioeconomy Coalition of Minnesota. Our mission is to, again, articulate a policy and regulatory agenda to help the industry grow, all the way through from R&D through commercial production and use. Many of you have probably worked with Life Science Alley and BioBusiness Alliance. They've been a part of this field, but real leaders in this field for a number of years. We partnered with them to develop a policy chapter for a bioindustrial roadmap that came out in 2012. And in summer of 2012, after the roadmap was out, we all got together with a bunch of the companies and decided, well, let's not just stick this report on the shelf. Let's go to the Capitol and start talking about these ideas. So we organized the Bioeconomy Coalition. We have startup companies, legal and other service providers, agriculture, forestry. So we have the startup companies, the existing industries, all working together to help this industry grow further in the state and get bigger. In 2013, this is our first year, we advocated for two things, and in partnership with our legislative sponsors, we were successful in doing two things: creating some grant funding through the Next Gen Energy Board, which previously only funded bioenergy and biofuels. Now it can make investments and develop strategy in bio-based chemicals, and well, we're very excited about that. The RFP just came out last week for that grant program. That's going to help a lot of our companies develop new product lines, do pilot facilities, and really keep more of this activity in Minnesota. We also worked on broadening Minnesota's ethanol mandate to be a fuel-neutral biofuel mandate. That's important because we have companies like Gevo in Minnesota. Gevo bought an ethanol plant and converted it over to produce butanol instead of ethanol. This can be blended at a higher level than ethanol and gasoline. It was previously barred from entering Minnesota's fuel market. Totally unintended consequence of a good policy. Now that's changed. We have a biofuel mandate, so other biofuels can enter the marketplace as well, as long as they're certified by the US EPA. 2014, our big focus is looking at programs that help encourage commercial scale production in Minnesota. This is really crucial. BioAmber was up here as a success story, and it is. BioAmber is a really exciting company based in Plymouth. They displace fossil-based materials. They produce something called succinic acid. But when it came time for them to build their first commercial facility, they went to Sarnia, Ontario, because Sarnia has industrial programs to help get those plants up and running. And unfortunately, we did lose a lot of the headquarter R&D jobs as well when we lost that plant. It's exciting that we had an $80 million IPO, but a lot of their headquarter jobs are now in Montreal, and a lot of their production's in Sarnia. So we have everything in place as a state to have this cluster grow. We just need a few little policy tweaks, and it's really going to explode. That is the end of my presentation.
Brendan, Steve, Mike, thanks for your illuminating presentations today. You've really, I think, teed up our next conversation well, and that's going to be what we do next. I'm probably not alone in having a few questions I'd like to ask you, but just the richness and depth of our presentations today, we're a little behind schedule. So we'll take a 10-minute break right now and then come back for our second panel. And following that second panel, we'll have an opportunity for audience Q&A, and we'll merge this. So we'll have an opportunity to talk about emerging clusters and also where we go next. One big discussion at the end here. So please join us back here in 10 minutes. Thanks.